Hello, and welcome to You Ask the Question, a regular feature where Speaking of Timmins will take a specific question asked by one of our viewers and get you an answer. Our question today, one we hear a lot in Timmins: why is gas so much more expensive in Timmins than it is in North Bay, Sudbury, and Toronto? To get an explanation, Speaking of Timmins reached out to Canada's guru of gas, Dan McTague, a former MP on Parliament Hill from 1993 to 2011 and founder of the website www.tomorrowsgaspricestoday.com. One of the questions that is asked in Timmins by many people on a daily basis is why gas is so much more expensive here and in other parts of Northern Ontario than it is in Southern Ontario. Can the transportation of bulk fuel be that expensive?
And if you really need a calculator to do this, but it really requires a bit more transparency.
Yeah.
In truth in numbers is what you really which you're looking for. This is not new to me. 17 years ago, I did travel Timmins in 1997 to talk about unusually high fuel prices, and I wrote a report called I think at the time I was a member of Parliament, Liberal Committee on Gasoline Pricing, and it was a problem then. It continues to be a problem today, and that's that. The price differential between what you pay in, say, Sudbury versus where Sudbury is a little lower now, it's $1.33, and what you're paying in Timmins remains stubbornly high, and it has a lot to do, I suspect, with not a lot of transparency on the price breakdown, and for that reason, I think that reason alone accounts for why the prices are where they are. We all know they're high, but where are they high? Are they high at the retail level? Are they high at the wholesale level? Are they high because of transportation? Are they high because no one wants to supply the market because it doesn't have the kind of activity and what they call throughputs that you see in other more metropolitan areas across the country or better in the United States? But the numbers are pretty clear. If you start, there are two issues that make up the price of fuel. The first, obviously, is the price of crude, but that's not as important as the market for reformulated gasoline, which is traded at a very different market. It's a NYMEX, and every day the price establishes in U.S. terms. So you might be paying $1, $2, probably trading around $2.39 a gallon, and you have to multiply that, of course, by the Canadian to U.S. term, the Canadian. So that's that makes in part of it. But if you look at all things being considered equal, wholesale prices for gasoline or gasoline at the market is trading at around 71 cents a liter.
Can you provide our viewers with an overview of how the price of fuel is set before it starts making its way north and the price seems to escalate?
They take a snapshot of that NYMEX market right about now, that New York Mercantile Exchange, and they look for regular unleaded, and that's where that goes up or down based on gallonage, based on U.S. currency. They translate that into Canadian currency, and then, of course, because we pay all of our commodities in U.S. terms. Canadians demanded that in 1984, and that's what you're going to get from now on. You have to buy it in U.S. If your dollar is strong, it's great, but if the dollar is not so strong, it leads to certain weaknesses. The oil companies, and that's a handful of them, who really are not so much in the business of pricing anymore, offer gasoline at a particular cost. At the end of every day, usually ending at 3:30 in the afternoon our time, and then they decide what that price will be plus the markup for what's known as a refinery margin. So you have a refinery price today in Sudbury, today in St. Sault Ste. Marie. That wholesale, what they call rack price, will be in the 83.5 cent range.
Do the wholesalers or gas station owners have to pay additional fees to get the fuel up north, or is it simply the cost of transportation?
Well, the cost of transportation is already there, and the reason for that is this. Toronto's wholesale price is 77.7 cents last Friday.
Okay.
It's 83 cents for Sudbury. So you're already seeing a pretty significant price delta or difference between Toronto and Sudbury. It doesn't cost 6 cents a liter to drive gasoline from Toronto to Sudbury. And then, of course, there's probably from Sudbury to where you are, terminals and trucks will have to drive the usual things, 40,000 liters, depending, of course, on the conditions of the road, etc. 40,000 liters, which is a tank and a pup, usually for $0.015 a liter. So, you could see prices as high wholesale for the Timmins area for the retailer to purchase at about 85 cents a liter. That's if a retailer is an independent.
Do the wholesalers or gas station owners have to pay additional fees to get the fuel up north, or is it simply the cost of transportation?
At 85 cents a liter, they have to pay the taxes as well, like anyone else does. So assuming we're using 85 cents as a wholesale price that the retailer has to pay. Now that's retailers who are not owned or not big box stores or a Pioneer, which is owned by Suncor or big refiners themselves. Talking mom and pop has to buy it for 85 plus 24.7. And you put 24.7 on 85, that comes to buck 9.7. Then you have to multiply that, by the way, by 13%. So that brings you to $1.25 a liter.
Okay. So in
So they're not,
essence,
they're not able to turn their pumps on for under $1.25.
in other words, the local retailers are making roughly 13 or 14 cents per liter. They're really not
No,
making.
they're not making that either because they're at 125.9, whatever the retail margin is. Let's say it's 10 cents a liter. Remember, some of that has to be HST. I didn't include the HST on that. So to get to $1.38, my guess is that the retail margin is about 11 cents a liter, roughly, and that's being relatively generous, which they probably, depending on people pay, most people pay by either debit or credit, and if they pay credit, of course, you knock 3 cents off that, maybe even 4 or 5, depending on the kind of credit card you use. Suffice it to say that, you're looking at probably 8 to 9 cents a liter, and that's probably being generous is what the retailer could make, but it really depends on how much gas you're selling. If you're only selling, 2,000 liters a day, you do the math. Is it worth, is it worth the effort? If they're selling 20,000, it's different. The question is, if the wholesale price for gasoline in the Toronto region is 77.7, for argument's sake, 78 cents a liter, and you add your taxes, why is it 85 in Timmins?
Yeah.
Surely that it doesn't cost 8 cents a liter to drive, a tanker from with a pop trailer from Finch and I think it's the big facility there, which is at Finch and Keel, or the Bronte terminal, all the way up to Timmins at 8 cents a liter. That's or 7 cents a liter. That's I think we should get in that business if that were the case. I think the wholesale price difference between Toronto and the north is 6 cents a liter. That's pretty steep.
Is distance the only big disadvantage that Timmins has when it comes to the price of gas?
There are two disadvantages. Distance is one, but also volumes are the other for Timmins. It's not, it's not a city of 400,000, it's 40,000. And that, if you have a lot of retailers there, it means that, their retail margin is much higher. In Toronto, where it costs a lot to have a site, but of course they have higher volumes, like more people purchasing. The retail margin is, in the Toronto area between 5 and 8 cents a liter, not where you are, which is between 10 and 12 cents a liter. So that's another I gave you the first half, which is to explain why there's an 8 cent differential. Yeah. And I'm giving you the extra 5 or 6 on the retail side. So retailers, yes, they take in more money, but the problem is in order to have the gas there, keep it there, and to do all the other things to manage the gas, they're not going through the gasoline to make up the difference.
Is it then safe to say that the only way people in Timmins and Northern Ontario can expect the price of gas to go down significantly is if the price of crude goes down?
Crude is one thing, but I made there was a piece I did last night on CTV where I said, look, because the Canadian dollar, all of our energy is priced in U.S. terms, whether it's refined gasoline or crude that we produce, whether we buy it locally or produce it locally or we refine it locally in Canada. The fact is we have to automatically add the fact that it's in U.S. terms. This time last year, it took 103 Canadian cents to buy $1 US. This year, it's $1.11, $1.12. So we've lost automatically 8 cents right off the top.
Yeah.
And that forces the upward pressure on wholesale. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that's an important factor for people to understand. Timmins, of course, is further away, which means that there's more of a transportation issue, and likely that there's a greater retail margin to cover the costs and convenience of keeping gasoline. But overall, I expect, and I'm fully waiting for in the next 7 to 10 days, where you're going to see some pretty significant price drops of 2 or 3 or even 4 cents a liter. Why? Because you're seeing prices drop pretty much everywhere outside of Northern Ontario in the rest of Canada. And second, we're converting from summer to winter gasoline. why that's important. It costs a lot more for a refinery to put additives in to stabilize gasoline in the summer because it becomes more volatile. It evaporates. You get NOx and all sorts of other problems. So at this time of year, as it gets colder, you know that better than most, you don't need to have that more expensive blended gasoline. And so that's usually good for a 3-cent liter drop. Would we see by, say after Thanksgiving next week, prices in the 134 range? I would count on it. I mean, again, they can hold off on this, but I think you're in certainly in line for a major correction in the Timmins market downwards of at least 5 cents a liter.
There also seems to be a pattern, at least in Timmins, where the price of gas goes up a number of cents a few days before each long weekend. Is this a norm across the province? Is it a Northern Ontario thing? Or is it a myth that really has nothing to do with long weekends, but has to do with fluctuations in the price of crude?
It's hit and miss, but I don't think it's necessarily true. It might have been years ago, and in certain larger cities, it's not the case at all. If anything, we're going to see prices decreasing this weekend, heading into this weekend, rather than increasing. What's also at play here, and I think that's critical for people to understand, is that places like North Bay had extremely high prices right up until about 3 weeks ago. They were in the 135 range stubbornly throughout the entire summer. Whereas Timmins remained the same, pretty much staying at between 136 and 139 for pretty much the entire summer. But I think it's more a casual thing. It would happen, but we seen, unless we benchmark these things, I don't necessarily see that being the case. It certainly has been my experience. If it is happening, it's those guys doing it locally. Because there's no push on the market right now. The market numbers are dropping. They're stabilizing. As I said, you guys are in for a major correction up there of 4 or 5 cents a liter.
That concludes our very first edition of You Ask the Question. I'd like to thank our guest, Dan McCaig, and would like to remind you that if you have a question you'd like to see Speaking of Timmins tackled, please submit it to our Facebook page. I'm Frank Rock, and this was You Ask the Question.